So yeah, I will go ahead and introduce Thank God Ebenezer. Again, thank God for being here, and Thank God is a bioinformatician at the European Bioinformatics Institute, EMBL-EBI, and United Kingdom with the Uniport team. His role focuses on developing computational pipelines for automatic functional annotation of proteins using evolutionary models. Prior to joining EMBL, Thank God was a postdoctoral researcher at the Earlham Institute, EI, which is a United Kingdom National Facility for Genomics, where he worked on wheat transcriptomics and epigenetics. Thank God studied for his PhD degree in biochemistry at the University of Cambridge, where he worked on the genome of, I'm going to murder that name, I'm sorry. Eugela Gracilius? Did I say that right, thank God?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Oh, I tried. He has a master's degree in evolutionary toxology and pollution management from the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and a bachelor's degree in parasitology and entomology from, your university that you did your bachelor's degree. I should have asked beforehand.
You don't need to pronounce it right, so you can just
from Nigeria.
Yeah.
A really unique sounding university. Aside from dry lab science, Thank God is involved in fostering dynamic international, regional, and local collaborations in science. Recently, Thank God Ebenezer, working with other colleagues, initiated the formation of the Ugala International Network, EIN, and the African BioGenome Project, AfricaBP. And I would like to welcome Thank God Ebenezer again, and you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, and also to Ross for inviting me, and to the AG Biodata team. So I'm just going to share my screen. No, I can't. It worked before, but it's not working now, but just 1 minute. There you go. Can people see my screen, please?
You shared it for a minute and then, here it is. Great.
All right. Okay. So my name is ThankGod Ebenezer, and I'm a bioinformatician at the European Bioinformatics Institute in Kingston, near Cambridge. And today I will be talking to us about more on fostering international collaboration. And I'll be focusing on the African BioGenome Project, which is started about 2 years ago. Actually, it did start properly last year. So, and the aim basically is, looking at genomics for the future of biological diversity across the continents of Africa. So, I will be talking about the goals and background of the AfricaBP. I'll be talking briefly about the pilot project and what has been done. And I'll be talking about the AfricaBP structure, what the possible funding mechanisms are, the potential funding mechanisms, and also some key highlights we've recorded since starting about 12 months ago, what the next steps are, and then social media presence, communication, and the wrap up. So there are basically 3 goals within the AfricaBP, because the AfricaBP aims to sequence genomes of about 100,000 plants and animal species, and also eukaryotic microbes. And the first goal is to coordinate all non-human genome sequencing efforts to act as a forum for the non-human space. And the second goal is to initiate, develop, and support new non-human genome sequencing efforts, mainly extending into areas that has not been explored previously. And of course, sequencing over 100,000 species and deploy this sequence data to regional infrastructure, such as regional infrastructure and facilities, such as the Africa Center for Disease Control, PGI, and also the African Union Inter-Africa Bureau for Animal Resources. And we believe that by doing so, we'll be able to inform policy and build the much needed capacity across the continent. And of course, the capacity here meaning focusing on genomics and bioinformatics. So just a bit of a background on the project. So again, we're focusing on biodiversity, and mainly because we do know that the global biodiversity is a shared heritage, and nearly all continents is endowed with one form of biodiversity or the other. And there is also the phenomenon of the sixth mass extinction. For instance, this figure here is from the Conservation International Foundation, and showing some of the extraterrestrial biodiversity hotspots. And this from the USA Today, showing some of the species that are going extinct since 1970. And now, Africa plays a significant role when it comes to global biodiversity, and is second to South America. And of course, it's also an essential component of the global biodiversity hotspots, and mainly having woodland, savanna, semi-desert, evergreen, and so many other types of biodiversity basically across the continent. But one thing we do know is that human activities, both in Africa and globally, and poses huge threat to biodiversity. And of course, this could be seen in land and sea usage, pollution, over exploitation of species, climate change, and invasive species and diseases, as we've seen with COVID-19, and of course with monkeypox as well. And we do know that the biodiversity is happening at an unprecedented scale, basically the global biodiversity loss, and we need a huge urgency or a form of unprecedented urgency to actually arrest this. So this is Africa here, and of course this diagram shows the biodiversity loss in percent compared to the intact ecosystem. So the blue is where it's still intact, and the red is where it used to be intact, but now it's kind of losing it. Then one of the things we want to do in AfricaBP is that, as I mentioned, sequencing plant and animal genomes, not eukaryotic microbes. So we'll be looking at sequencing the genomes of mammals, fish, reptiles, also invertebrates, all those annelids, and insects, plants, algae, and just about all eukaryotes. And we're focusing on 100,000, not because that is the species available on the continent, but it's basically because that is the species that we know that exists in terms of the records available, because there are way much more than 100,000 species on the continent. Then, so one key thing basically is that we're working with the Vertebrate Genome Project, which is our key partners, to sequence about 10 to 12 species. So at the moment we've done 2 in South Africa, because the core principle of AfricaBP is to carry out this genome sequencing on the ground, basically because that is one way to build the capacity, and also that is one way to help inform policy and ensure that some of the activities that are ongoing are actually connected to regional policy institutions as well. And we also believe that that would also help to solve issues of digital sequencing information and Nagoya Protocol and all of those things, and ethics and legal issues, so which I'm going to talk about briefly. Then, so there are also several other communities, for instance, the Darwin Tree of Life and EGA and the 1000 Chile Genome Project. So again, all of this are all part of the BioGenome Project. So there are 5 grand challenges that we aim to address in AfricaBP. So the first is the genomics and bioinformatics technologies for the agri-environment. So all of those will focus on the actual technologies that are driving some of the discoveries in the agri-environment. Then the second will focus more on the biology and the kind of translation of some of those things, crops and livestock improvement and health. Then the third will focus on the genomics for conservation of endangered species. Now this is mainly focused on conservation aspects. Then there is also the fourth grand challenge. We focus on socioeconomics, ethics, and policy, because the project itself is not just a scientific project; it's a social scientific project, because it also has some ethical considerations and so many other things that especially with communities. And the fourth is technology development, knowledge exchange, and industry, because we believe that while doing that, there are aspects of things. There are things that the AfricaBP needs to work on in order to be able to help in the project. So one or two of those things, for instance, include being able to promote and help to advance technologies related to that can be used in the field with limited reliance on electricity and the internet, for instance, because the access to internet is quite limited, and again, so is access to electricity. And genomic technology hugely depends on those two factors. So the conversion will be, how do we design systems that have limited reliance on those things? And not just that, technology development as well in livestock. How do we also help to break plant and animal species, for instance, that are resilient to climate change and so many other things? And we hope that by doing that, that would also have be connected to industry and help bring that perspective. And of course, all of this are focused on that two things: the value proposition and capacity building within the continent. So we aim that through AfricaBP, we'll be able to provide standards when it comes to biodiversity genomics in Africa, and of course, working with the standards of the BioGenome Project as well. Then this will include in areas of sampling, sample preparation and nucleic acids preparation, sequencing and assembly, information, informatics, data storage, and IT, and of course, ultimately value proposition and empowerment of the people. So basically, one of the things we've done is just we started properly last year, and mainly starting off with a pilot project and see if this is something that is doable. But before then, we also were able to be doing consultations. In 2020, we had the first workshop at the Biodiversity Genomics 2020, and that focused more on consultations, and then also in 2021. So now we've started the process, and we've started to sequence species, though it's going much slower than expected. And again, this is something most genome projects also experience. And so we started with the pilot. The idea is that we run the pilot, and then it's going to be a 10-year project. Pilot, the phase 1, and then the phase 2. So currently, this is what the partnership framework currently looks like. We have the AfricaBP here, and then we have regional nodes and institutions and other existing genomic capacity across the continent. We have the African Union Inter-Africa Bureau. We have communities such as the BioGenome Project and the Vertebrate Genome Project and the 10,000 Plant Genome Project. Then we have communities on socioeconomics and policy, and also the African Agricultural Women Organization, that aims to promote women participation in agriculture. And of course, we have technologies companies like Nagoya Biotech that we're also working with to sequence this genome. So again, these are some of the communities we're kind of working with currently. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the pilot. So in the pilot study, I mentioned previously that we're collaborating partnering with the VGP, mainly to sequence some of the VGP species that are endemic to Africa. We're also partnering with the 10,000 plant species to sequence some plant species that are endemic to the continent of Africa. So so far, efforts have focused on sourcing of these species in Africa, obtaining permits, and through the University of South Africa, again, they are providing support and funding to source for this species, and also to obtain the necessary permits, and of course to ensure clearance with custodians of these samples, for instance, on areas of material transfer agreements and mutually agreed terms and CTES permits and all of those permits mainly, and also to ensure compliance with national Nagoya Protocols regulations or ABS procedures. So again, this is more around the partnership. So the pilot project, we have about 8 subcommittees. Again, we have the sample collection and processing, sequencing and assembly, annotation, all the way to communications partnership and fundraising. So each of these subcommittee have about up to 8 members per subcommittee working together, basically. So one of the key challenge is on sample collection, particularly, especially when it comes to getting the permits and things. That is where some of the time kind of goes in and obtaining the permits. But once the permits is obtained, then we send them to the lab. So mainly that is one of the key challenge in terms of the key bottleneck in regards to this project, because with the permits there has to be ethical consideration. There also has to be multiple layers of procedures that needs to be observed. So within that permit area mainly is focused on issues around Nagoya Protocols, because in Africa there are basically many challenges in the sense that the Nagoya Protocol itself does not take into account the many practices on the continent, and it is only just recently, and I think about last year or 2 years ago, or this year, I can't remember, that the African group of negotiators are also now beginning to ensure that some of these things are incorporated within the Nagoya Protocol. And again, there is no clear attribution of responsibility for the enforcement of the ABS. So the Nagoya Protocol mainly, I'll just briefly talk about that, is that it's an international agreement amongst countries on how data could be shared or who benefits from a particular scientific effort, especially when it comes to biological samples. So if you take a sample from a particular area, then you have to be able to have an understanding with that community on how you would use the sample. Usually, if you're using a sample for research, there isn't so much of an expectation. That is just like the summary, but most communities do. But most of the time, some of the issues is if there are some potentially commercial benefits, then how do the communities also benefit? So each country have their own procedures and that needs to be followed. So one other challenge is that there's an ineffective mechanism, because most of the countries also do not kind of have the capacity to actually implement some of those things. So it makes things a bit difficult. So it's like a blanket, sometimes have a blanket response on a particular thing. So it makes it somewhat difficult. And of course, unclear regulatory regime at national and regional levels, and lack of shared guidelines for effective implementation. So these are some of the things that AfricaBP we aim to advance in terms of resolving some of those issues. It might take time, but hopefully this is something that would help. And one more important thing, which I don't have in the slide now, is on issues around digital sequence information. So which is what the genomics tends to kind of represent. And that is one area that it's been very difficult to have a mutual, a general or a mutual understanding. Hopefully very soon, we hope maybe in Canada, where the next meeting will be, there could be some progress. So AfricaBP structure. So this is more of the structure of the AfricaBP. So we have its members of the steering committee, then we have partners and collaborators, then we have the advisory board, and we have the science and technology committee, the monitoring and evaluation committee, then we have the regional coordinators. And of course, each country represents a node within each region. So, and there are 5 regions across the continent of Africa. So possible funding mechanism. So we're currently in the process of securing core funding, so that we don't have like core dedicated funding in AfricaBP, and that is how we started. And one of the things we did is that we are working with projects globally and also in Africa who already have the funding, but then we have the community and the people who are able to do this, and then we're working with them to actually sequence these genomes. So one of the projects is the Biodiversity Genome Project. We also have the 10,000 Plant Genome Project. And of course, this has also started to provoke other partners to come on board. For instance, the University of South Africa have also started to put in some money in terms of sequencing genomes of South Africa. And there's also another company that have also come on board. So all of this has now started to kind of connect to each other. But all of this, we call them supplementary funding, mainly, whereby we leverage on regional and global funding. So we're in the process of securing the core funding, which we hope would maybe through the African Union. So I'm going to talk more about that, about the things we're doing to actually make progress in this respect. So, so I mentioned previously that AfricaBP launched the pilot in 2021, and since then we sequenced about 2 to 3 genomes. But then I will actually sequence more, but most of the times is that you find that you sequence it, and maybe the sample has been around for like 10, 15 years and all of those things. So sometimes it's a bit challenging. So since 2021, we have some of the key highlighted that we've published a position paper of the African BioGenome Project in Nature. And this position paper mainly talks about what the project is, who is involved, what we've done in the past, when it started, where we're going over the next 10 years, and what is required in terms of funding, and who are supposed to do what and what in Africa. So the paper also generated a huge interest across the continent, and it was also featured in the Science magazine as well. And the paper was featured in more than 138 news outlets across Africa, Europe, North America, Asia, Australia, and also South America. So there are mainly 4 programs within AfricaBP. The first program is focused on animal genomes. So this program is focused on anything animal genomes mainly. And we call it the AfricaBP, the Nelson Mandela AfricaBP Genomes for Conservation of Nature. So we recently received approval from the Nelson Mandela Foundation to be able to link up the Nelson Mandela name with this program. Very soon we've also applied for funding, mainly for a small amount of money to actually kickstart the funding within this particular program. So the second program is the Plant Genomes, and we are in the process of having a name for it. So I wouldn't say it yet because it's not yet formal, but we're still in the process of doing that, and efforts are underway. Then the third one is the Community of Practice on Biodiversity Framework. So this third program focuses on issues around ethics and Nagoya and the Convention on Biological Diversity, and issues around the Nagoya Protocol on biosafety and the access and benefit sharing. So all of these things I'm talking about are mainly frameworks and regulations and laws and things that have been set in place to actually help to address some of these discussions when it comes to access to genetic resources and access to biological resources. So we believe that the AfricaBP project will actually provoke some of these conversations, and it is very helpful that the project aims to address the problems and not cause more problems when it comes to this. So we are engaging them monthly. So one of those within that program, one of the meetings is called the AfricaBP Roundtable Meeting, whereby we invite the national representatives for each country on issues, for instance, on Nagoya, or issues on CBD, or other issues, or for instance, Nagoya Protocol, to just kind of understand it. So one of the things we aim to do is that at the end, hopefully by the end of the year or in early 2023, we'll be able to write a paper around those discussions as well. Then the fourth program is the Open Institute for Genomics and Bioinformatics, because we believe in AfricaBP that genome sequences, especially efforts like this, should be able to do 2 things. Apart from the fact that we're sequencing and then publishing, we should be able to actually build the capacity needed on the ground, such that, for instance, if we want to conserve a species, the people who are close to this species should also be able to have the capacity they need to continue the conservation effort, because the sequencing should not basically stop in just one species or just one sample of a particular species. But then what about if we want to do like comparative genomics and over several years period of time? So we set up the Open Institute for Genomics and Bioinformatics, mainly focusing on knowledge exchange. That is what this program will do, focusing on issues around knowledge exchange, or is currently doing rather on knowledge exchange, and that will include workshops, training, and one of those workshops is the AfricaBP workshop on endemic African species, because one of the things we also found out is that sometimes we have trainings in Africa, but then most of the species are not endemic to the people, and that way it does not be able, it doesn't provide the linkage in terms of local identity. So one of the things, again, we try to promote is that the people use their own species, come with their own data, and then work on their own data. So this also does additional things like linking up AfricaBP members with other corporations. For instance, we have the MGI. They are kind of looking at the MGI Africa Genome Machines Challenge, whereby they kind of identify African institutions in Africa, and then they partner with them to place a G400 machine. So we've been able to organize one workshop within this project program, and the next one is scheduled for September. And so the core thing here, apart from the capacity, again, is that we aim to target the grassroots scientists, mainly in institutions where they wouldn't have been able to have the opportunity to actually get involved in genomics or bioinformatics, because there are quite a lot of institutions in Africa whereby we don't. That's like, it will be very challenging to find a genomic scientist or bioinformatician, in that institution. So those are kind of the targets, and we hope that by doing so, that would help to percolate some of this knowledge across the continent. So these are mainly the 4 programs. So I'm just going to talk about how these programs links to each other. For instance, here we have the AfricaBP pilot that was launched in June 2021, and then we have the position paper published about 3-4 months ago. Then we have the Nelson Mandela Genomes for conservation of nature, and of course the idea is to target 6,000 animal species. And the current players are the University of South Africa, Rockefeller University, Nkaba, University of Cape Town, and the South African Biodiversity Institute. Then we also have the DAISEA Genomes. So this is just a placeholder name. We're still processing the actual name. Then the idea is to target plant species, and of course the same current player. Sorry, someone talking. Sorry, is someone talking, please? Okay, so then we have the community of practice. So in June, we had the head of the Nagoya Protocol unit at the United Nations Environment Program from Canada, talk about the Nagoya Protocol and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is the program where we have all this kind of discussion. And of course, we have the Open Institute, mainly targeting early career scientists and people who would ordinarily will not have the opportunity to connect to scientists in genomics and bioinformatics elsewhere. So, and these are mainly cross-cutting. They have cross-cutting relationships amongst them. So they are not all standalone programs. They are all interconnected with one another. So mainly looking at each of them individually. So with Nelson Mandela Genomes, we've been able to sequence about 2 animal genomes. So this is just one of them, the Rhinotyphlos lidi. So this is a big blind snake. And so this is done in collaboration with VGP and also Nkaba. So mainly majority of this is done in South Africa by Nkaba. So then again, with the VGP, we're working with them also to do the reassembly of this data, basically. And this also again goes through the AfricaBP Open Institute. So this is then the statistics, which consists of more than about consists of 759, more than 1,000 base pair, but then when polished, it's around 6,000 base pair. So, but then majority of this is done in collaboration with the VGP. So in the second one, we are working with the 10,000 Plant Genome Project to focus on grassroots conservation. And we have a select of 100 plants endemic to Africa to sequence. And out of that, we've nominated about 20 of those. And then we're now focusing on the top 5 to sequence them. And so the idea is to, test it to be sure that this is doable, and then we can then be able to scale up a bit. Now, for the community of practice, so the idea is to have monthly meetings with Global Environment Facility, national focal points for the African region. So each country have their own GEF national focal points. So the GEF mainly is a platform where they kind of put the it's kind of an organization where you have the funding on issues on like biodiversity that needs to be used to improve biodiversity. So that's just like a summary of it. It's part of the UNCBD, but mainly looking at all of those things. And one conversation around the GF is that depending on what the discussion comes out to be, that maybe 1% of profits in a digital sequence related effort could potentially go into the GAF pot. So now we also have discussions with the Convention on Biological Diversity National Focal Points, the Nagoya Protocol, the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, and also the Access and Benefit Sharing. So last year we had last month rather, we have a meeting with the UN person, as I mentioned previously. Then again with the Open Institute, we are able to we are now organizing workshops and trainings and also connecting scientists across Africa. So we're also now drafting a paper in order to talk about how all of this fits together, as well with the Open Institute, how it fits together and what the vision is within the Institute, both in the short term, in the medium term, and also in the long term. So, this is the MGR Africa Sequencing Challenge that I talked about, and we have scientists in AfricaBP who are also applying for all of this. So, and again, we are working with the Welcome Connecting Center to deliver the first biodiversity genomic course in future learning as well. So current profile of the AfricaBP, following the publication of the position paper, we've received several invitations and several interests. One of this, just the top three of this, is mainly to speak at the UN General Assembly in September, to speak at the FAO meeting, which was supposed to be in Rome, but now to be virtual. Then we also, in June, we were invited to the African Union to speak about the AfricaBP and how it connects to the African Union agenda on the establishment of gene banks. Because one of the things AfricaBP wants to do is that through this project, we're able to strengthen the gene banks basically in Africa. And the meeting held in Zambia in June. So now we've started to, develop AfricaBP. It's kind of started in an unconventional way. But now we're at the point where we now need to institutionalize AfricaBP, mainly for sustainability and for long term to achieve its long-term goals. So we are in the process of doing that very soon, and hopefully by the end of August, there will now be a centralized coordination for AfricaBP, institutionalized, and it will now be a legal entity or a program within a legal entity, and that would also help with the multilateral instruments that AfricaBP requires in order to function properly, both now and in the future. And that will also help to calculate AfricaBP activities across the continent and target institutions. And that will also help to mobilize the resources and the core funding and some of those things that we kind of need to be able to run, basically, because majority of these have been driven by early career researchers, and it's also interesting to see how this project has developed. So the next step is that we aim to publish the roadmap document for the Open Institute, because the Open Institute is a core aspect of AfricaBP. It's kind of, it ties together some of the things when it comes to early career researchers, and when it comes to reaching out to people who would not otherwise have the opportunity to do genomics and bioinformatics in Africa. And that includes like a whole institution, so multiple institutions in multiple countries. So we're writing the position paper soon, and then we also aim to publish the first set of genomes from AfricaBP. So we're just waiting for this to get to around 10 or 20. And then we also aim to publish a paper on the AfricaBP engagement with stakeholders on access and benefit sharing and the post-2020 biodiversity framework. So that will bring perspective from AfricaBP efforts and discussions with all the national focal points we've had, and then this will go into a paper, basically. And of course, it's journalizing AfricaBP. So social media and wrap up, we have a website, African BioGenome, which you can visit. And we have Twitter. We're active on Twitter. We are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We are on LinkedIn. And so you can also contact us with this email address, africabp-chairs@Google Groups, and one of the chairs will respond to your email. And this is an email address for all of the community in AfricaBP, which is up to 1,000 now. And of course, you can sign up to our mailing list. Yeah. And I would like to thank members of the AfricaBP committees, majority of them early careers, and we also have established scientists as well. They are mainly 87% of them are based in Africa, and we also have people supporting from outside the continent, because the idea is that the African scientists based in Africa would help to lead the project and ensure that things are done on the continent. So we also have several partners. These are mainly the partners that have signed the MOU with AfricaBP. That includes bottleneck, BGI, EBI, and the Institute of Pasteur in Tunisia, Mount Kenya University in Kenya, NADIC in Ethiopia, and NICD in South Africa. On the list, I'll say again, just continue, because there are more than 30 or 40 of them. So with this, I would like to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have.